Hello YouTube, it's been a minute, but I'm back to discuss Total Drama, and this time it'll be the fourth season, Total Drama Revenge of the Island. This season has never been one of my favorites. Even back when it first aired, I was disappointed to not have the OGs in the mix. They do make cameo appearances in the season, but I want them full time. Come on, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So each time I'm going into this season, I'm never going in too excited. That was the case again this time around. I was doing my full rewatch, going over the three other seasons, and then I did take a few months to finally get around to watching this season because I just don't look forward to it at all. I will say, last time I watched it a few years ago, I did enjoy it. I remember I was like, oh, this season isn't too bad. I'm too hard on this season. But I didn't have the same experience this time I watched it. This time I'm like, okay, yeah, not that great, and I don't need to watch this season again anytime soon. But without further ado, I'll just get on to discussing the season, and I'll jump right into the characters, starting with Chris McLean himself, the host who has gone off the rails. I think the state that Chris is in usually represents the season as a whole quite well. And this season, I would say Chris has gone totally off the rails, and it's almost sad to see what's become of him. He has some good moments, but it's just like too much. Just bloodthirsty maniac doing anything he can to make an entertaining show. I thought he was already going off the deep end in Total Drama World Tour, but Revenge of the Island is like taking it up a notch. It's just too much, too far. The season ends with him getting arrested. The whole season takes place at Camp Wawanakwa, which he's completely destroyed, making it radioactive, hazardous. I guess I'll say it now. I feel like the season has very much jumped the shark, and you can see that the most with Chris. So while he still holds the show together, and he is a good host, it's just too far. I think too much has happened with Chris. We need to dial it down a notch, okay? Now, Chris's other half is Chef, and I would say Chef had a better season than Chris had. Chef doesn't really change as much throughout the seasons. I would say he's still pretty similar to how he was in, say, World Tour in Action. He does play along with some of Chris's stuff. I also would say Chef doesn't have many memorable moments. I do think it was a nice touch at the end of the season that in both endings, Chef gets to drive off with everybody while Chris is the one who gets the bad ending. And that's all I can really say about Chef. Now, before I get into the new cast, I will touch on the cameos from the OGs this season. We start off with everybody driving by in a boat, and oh, it just felt like a rude tease. Like, come on, just bring it back to the island. That's who I want to see. I want to see them all. There's so much left to do with these characters. Of all the cameos, I would say Lindsay's cameo is probably my favorite because she's just such a breath of fresh air. She doesn't mess with the plot too much, but she just inserts her little comedic relief, and she's got her Lindsay charisma. She's always a nice addition, and I think she helped the season kind of get back on track when she appeared. Another iconic cameo was from Heather. She tries to steal the million from Chris, and it's like, oh yeah, you better get that million. She didn't get it at the end of World Tour because Ezekiel snatched it up, but she wanted it and she was going after it. I thought it was a nice way to see Heather back in pure villainy, but it made total sense. It wasn't just resorting her back to island. It was, yeah, she needs her money. Give it to her. None of the other cameos really stuck out to me. I guess there is Ezekiel, who just appears often, but he's not even really a contestant anymore. He's just like a creature sneaking around. Oh my gosh. Okay, now out with the old and with the new. I'll dive into the new contestants this season. I'll go in elimination order, and for Dakota, I will just do her later at her later exit. So starting out, we've got Stacy, and it was pretty obvious that she'd be a first boot because she just had the very obnoxious personality. She was just there to leave a strong impression at first and get an early exit. Stacy's whole thing is bragging about her family. She's got an obnoxious accent and she just does a little too much. I was fine to see her leave, but honestly, I feel a little bad for her with how she went out. I feel like it was just a little too cruel. She was annoying, sure, but did she deserve to lose her hair and just have everything working against her? She was just there for an episode. I feel like it was a little harsh. I guess it's an example of the toxic marshmallow in full effect, but the toxic marshmallow just like doesn't do anything for me in the first place, so I don't care. It was too cruel. I think it was too cruel what happened to Stacy. I don't like her though. Don't get it twisted. I don't care about Stacy at all. I guess she was entertaining for an episode. That's all I can give you, Stacy. Sorry. Next we have B, and justice for B. B was really putting up a strong fight, but he was the first real victim to Scott as he rose in his villainy. B was a great team player. He was silent though, so he just couldn't really defend himself. B, just the most heroic person on this cast. But since he didn't really speak, I don't have much to say about him besides cool guy, justice for B. I'd like to see more B. Next is Dawn, and she was probably the most heavily impacted by Scott. She found the hidden immunity idol, but it was a fake that Scott laid out. She read through Scott, and that's why Scott had to get her up out of the show. Dawn's whole thing is she's very connected with nature. She reads auras. She's a nice, chill girl, and nothing gets past her. We only ever really see Dawn have any sort of anger when it comes to Scott. And that's very telling for who Scott is, okay? I think Dawn is a fantastic character and I would love to see more of her. I was very sad to see her leave because she really was giving Scott some challenge. I wanted to see it from B, but we got it from Dawn and I was grateful to see it. I didn't know she had it in her. It's always disappointing to see Dawn leave. It just feels like wasted potential. I wish there was more of Dawn. She's definitely one of the standouts of this season. Next is Sam, and he's the gamer guy. He's basically Harold 2.0, but he doesn't have as many of the problems that Harold has. I don't like Sam though, for a lot of the same reasons I don't like Harold. I mean, I have a real grudge against Harold, so it's like night and day, but I still just don't like Sam, and I feel like he's just there to be an insert for nerdy guys, and you're not some hero. Sorry, not sorry. There's also his relationship with Dakota, and I think I'll just touch on that when I get to Dakota, because I don't want to talk about Sam for too long, honestly. Ugh. Next we had a double boot, but I'll start with Brick. I think Brick was a great addition to this season. He had a bit of a rivalry with Joe. They were more just like in competition because they wanted to be leaders, or it was a power thing. And I think this was the most interesting plot line of the pre-merge. Brick is a team player, Brick is loyal, Joe is a team leader, she is also loyal, and they just butted heads. But they had respect, and I really appreciated that respect. Their rivalry felt very grounding in a season of pure chaos, and it was necessary, for sure. Now, I do think Brick was a little too friendly and his team was a little too friendly. It got a little annoying, so I'm not upset that he left, but I do think there was also wasted potential with Brick to not make the merge, because I think it would have been interesting to see how him and Joe play if it's an individual game. Actually, that's one of my biggest complaints about this season. It takes way too long to get to the merge. Most of the season is pre-merge. We have a few episodes where like nobody's eliminated. Brick gets eliminated once, but they just switch him to the other team. And I don't know, I wish we could have gotten to the merge quicker. It would have been more interesting to see people like Brick and Dawn and Anne Maria in the merge. We just didn't get that. And while the merge this season, I would say it's the better half of the season, there's not as much of it. I don't know, it's just the pacing of this season, I think it was awful. Awful pacing. That's to be expected when you've only got, what, 13 episodes? But come on. If you just merged a few episodes sooner, like, what's the point of doing a merge so late in the season? Everybody knows the merge is when stuff gets interesting. But what do I know? You didn't need all the team swaps. Could have just merged. Like, whatever. Okay, next is Anne Maria. And Anne Maria, when I first watched, she was always one of my favorites because I just thought she was so funny. She's like the Jersey Shore type, and that's very early 2010s. You had the Real Housewives of New Jersey, you had Jersey Shore. I feel like New Jersey was very in at the time of Revenge of the Island. So Anne Maria being on the cast made total sense. She took her hair very seriously, and her hair could be used as a weapon. She had so much hairspray. In the snow episode, they use her as a shield. That just cracks me up. Anne Maria's got a lot of fire to her, so that leads to some fights, and she puts the drama in total drama. They never quite utilized that as much as they could have, though, because I guess they just wanted her to be comedic relief on the season, but I think Anne Maria would have been interesting if she was allowed to get her foot in the game. But then we get to her elimination, and she meets Ezekiel. They like fall in love. She thinks she gets a diamond from him, but it's cubic zirconium. She quits the game thinking it's a diamond. Then Chris tells her. And that's a real disappointing way to see Anne Maria go. Ugh, I didn't like it. It was unsatisfying. I would also say wasted potential. I don't think this cast of characters is too interesting to begin with, but even with what they have here, I still feel like a lot of wasted potential for pretty much the entire cast. I guess it was kind of funny how Anne Maria was like so not interested in Ezekiel until she thought that he had the diamond. Like, yeah, you do your thing, Anne Maria. I do the same too. Oh, there's no shame in being a sod if the money's right, but get it checked before you quit. Lesson learned, Anne Maria, lesson learned. Next is Dakota, and Dakota was an interesting character. She is the second boot of the season. She was a famous girl, and she had a rich father, so she thought everything was all about her. She thought she was the star of the show. She gets eliminated. She's mad that she's not going to get more camera time. She gets Daddy to call up Chris and gets back in the game, but as an intern. And seeing Dakota as an intern was interesting. We get to see her humbled a bit. She does not enjoy the intern life, but it's nice to humanize Dakota, and I feel like we really get to see another side to her character as an intern. I think, on paper, the concept of focusing on an intern is very interesting. Because we've seen throughout the whole show that Chris really treats the interns terribly. Those interns, those poor interns, they've been through a lot. A lot of them have not survived. So I think it's an interesting concept to see that from the perspective of an intern. And we got to see that through Dakota. But I don't like how this story ended. Dakota loses her hair. I don't really like that because I feel like she got humbled enough. So that's just another thing. How many times is total drama gonna make a character bald? But then it gets even worse because she re-enters the game and she starts transforming into Dakotazoid, and she's a mutant for the rest of her life now. Of course, I could state the obvious that this is totally jumping the shark, but I just feel like it's a cruel ending for the character. She can't really speak properly anymore. I guess she's strong, but at what cost? And then she immediately exits the game too. She gets voted out because Zoe's too scared to even be around her. I think that was a poor decision from Zoe, but I guess you gotta protect your safety. I don't know. She's met with Sam at her elimination, and Sam's all like, oh, you're so much cooler this way. You're like a character out of a video game. And I'm like, she's forever changed from what she was, and it's so sad. Like, okay, I guess you want to comfort her, but I just don't like that at all. How she exited the game and her exit was her getting approval from a guy. I would have liked to see her upset about it at least. I don't want to see her like be happy about it because some guy is happy about it for her. I think that's a very disturbing coupling. And I think this was just an entire step too far in the first place. I hate this storyline. I hate it. I hate the mutant thing that they did to Dakota. I feel like they just destroyed one of the better characters of the season, honestly. So we arrive to the final 6 and we finally get the merge at the final 6. That's absurd. The merge boot is Mike. Mike has the multiple personality disorder. That's insulting to begin with. I'm not gonna dive too deep into it, but I will say what Mike represents for DID, it's not good. This is not an accurate representation of that in any way, shape, or form. And I think it was an unnecessary inclusion to the season. If you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all. It was also a very big part of the season, unfortunately. Mike's whole thing is that he has these different personalities and there are different triggers that'll cause them to appear. Like a Jersey type, Vito, will appear when he rips off his shirt. He's got an athlete, he's got an old man. You get the gist. Mike is the character I enjoy the least out of all the characters this season, honestly. I can't stand him. I think he's insufferable. I think he drags every character he's associated with down by comparison, and I wish he didn't exist. There's so much I could say about Mike, but I don't want to. It's my video, so I'm just gonna move on. I was so glad he left. It was better late than never. Like, bye. Good riddance. And I think the season improved so much after he was gone. The next boot was Joe, and Joe wasn't always my favorite as a kid. I think I overlooked her, but my last rewatch before this one, I was like, wow, Joe is so cool. And she became my favorite character, and that's still true. I think Joe is the best character on this season. Joe is an antagonist, but she has her morals. She's grounded in her athlete standards, whatever. She's got the manipulative side. She plays the game hard, but when it's all said and done, she's gonna shake everybody's hand. And I think that makes for such a cool villain. When I really start to enjoy Joe, it is the Lindsay cameo episode where we get to see another side of her. We get to see her want to take on the makeup and be a little girly. And it's played for laughs and it is very funny, but it's also like we get to see another side of Joe here. And I appreciate that. I feel like there are a lot of layers to Joe. And in such a short season, I'm fond of any character who I get to see a bit more complexity to. She gets eliminated by Cameron, who she was trying to buddy up to. She was mad about it at first, but then Cameron reminds her, like, but I learned from you. And then she's like, oh, respect. I got respected. And she was proud of Cameron. I think that's just such a cool character. She's a class act. She's a villain, and she certainly spiced the season up, but she never really crossed lines. And for a season that crossed a lot of lines, Joe was a really solid addition who I would gravitate towards. Next is the real main antagonist of the season, and that is Scott. He spends the whole pre-merge throwing every competition so he can vote people out, and it's not the most exciting storyline. I think Scott adds some entertainment as a villain. I don't really like him that much. I think he's a bit annoying. You always need a good villain, and Scott does provide that. I just don't think he was as good of a villain as Joe was. It was very satisfying to see him finally get taken out, though, after all the failed attempts. I will say Scott was very good at getting me to root for other people, because some of the people who went up against him weren't the most compelling, but because I didn't like Scott, I was like, okay, I'm here for you. I don't think he's like the best total drama antagonist ever. He's not that exciting. I'll probably forget most of what he's done in a week, but Scott, he's notable. He's notable. And the last boot before the finale was Zoe. And Zoe is a character I never really cared for, but upon this rewatch, I did see some glimpses of Zoe that I definitely do enjoy. She starts off the season and she's the lonely girl, and that's relatable. But then she immediately gets paired off with Mike, and I don't like that. I don't like to see a lonely character just immediately get stuck with a guy. I guess it makes sense, but I just don't care for it. And I wish Mike got booted a little sooner, because as soon as Mike got booted, we get to see Zoe really come into her own again and really lock in on the game. She's a force to be reckoned with, Zoe is. She was out for blood, she got her vengeance for Mike, and then she was all about just winning. We got Commando Zoe, and she's so cool. Emotions turned off, all focused on the game. But she never fully lost her emotions, I will say. She did like Cameron. But while Zoe was still with Mike, I just found her insufferable. I found her to be knockoff Gwen. And that's very much the role she was designed to fill. But she's more intriguing than Gwen is, honestly. Gwen would never have a Commando Zoe moment. I think Zoe would have really benefited from a bigger merge and Mike still being an early merge boot. So she would have had more time to embrace what she became in the final few episodes. I was bummed that Zoe didn't make the finale, but you know, it makes sense. And I think her journey throughout the season, it's a nice journey, and it's like, okay, you came so close. But hey, look at what you've become. You have been able to stand on your own, and that's something to be proud of. So it was a good exit for Zoe, but she would have been a compelling winner if there was a bit more time dedicated to her being solo. She don't need a man. So that brings us to the finalist, and I will start with the less interesting finalist, and that would be Lightning. Lightning is a character I never liked. I thought he was mean. He does have some comedic purpose, but it's not really my preferred comedy. So I see the appeal in Lightning. It's just not quite my personal preference. I don't think he's a bad addition to this season. I do think he had no business winning this season. I think the finale did some interesting things with him, though, where we get to see his dad, and his dad's not really giving him the attention he wants. And when he loses to Cameron, we see Lightning fully break down. Lightning doesn't deserve the win in any way, but you do feel a little bad for him that he lost. Well, not so much that he lost, but once you realize why Lightning was participating, it's a little sad. But also, he was very mean. I wouldn't say he did anything too villainous besides not doing anything. He would actively avoid things. That was especially notable in the penultimate episode, where Zoe and Cameron are often about to die, and Lightning just keeps on moving. Doesn't help. Now, he does get pretty vicious with Cameron in the finale, but you're fighting for $1 million, so I can't blame you. It's satisfying to see Lightning lose. While I wouldn't pick him out as an ideal finalist, what they did with Lightning, it works. Last but not least is Cameron, and when I first watched, I believe Cameron, before I saw Total Drama All-Stars, Cameron was my favorite character from Total Drama Revenge of the Island. Cameron was the nerdy guy. Bubble boy. That was Cameron. He lived in a bubble. So this season saw him branching out into the world, making friends, proving that he can do stuff. And it's a compelling arc. He's not the most exciting character. He's not my favorite anymore. But his finale episode is compelling. I still think even in the penultimate episode, I don't quite like how he treated Zoe exactly. I do think their friendship was a little compelling, but also very boring. That friendship trio, insufferable. They needed to be split up sooner. His distrust in Zoe in that penultimate episode, that was very cool to see though. While I wish he was able to show some more strength in that episode, he was definitely much better than he was at the beginning of the season. And then he finally really comes into his own in the finale, and it's satisfying to see him win. But also, I don't think he's the most satisfying winner ever, because you're only finally earning it in the finale. I think it would have been a bit more satisfying if he proved his strength and he got booted because they thought he was too threatening, instead of him getting dragged to the finale because they thought he was a goat. I think a Zoe Lightning finale might have been a bit more interesting than a Cameron Lightning finale, but for how it all played out, I feel like they did the best they could with that finale. It was an entertaining finale. That is every Total Drama Revenge of the Island character, and I feel like I've said all I need to say about it. I don't like this season very much. I love Total Drama, I do, but this season in particular, even more so than some of the seasons following it, I just have such a rough time with this season. It's probably my least favorite season. We'll see, because I'm definitely gonna go rewatch All Stars next, and then Hagatu Island. I'm doing them all. If I made it through Revenge of the Island, I'll do them all. We'll see how I feel about those seasons now, but on my last rewatch at least, it was still my least favorite season, and I imagine it'll stay that way. Just, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That's the lesson. Everybody, take note. So until next time, bye!